They were shaking as they crouched behind the massive steel bins, their thin fingers digging through cold plates of half-eaten food. Two small boys, identical faces, hollow eyes, hunger written into every breath they took. The mansion towered above them, bright, silent, untouchable. One of the boys froze. Footsteps. A shadow stretched across the ground. A man stood there tall and still, his expensive shoes inches from their trembling hands. The boys looked up slowly, terror flooding their faces as food slipped from their grip and hit the dirt. No words were spoken. The man's eyes moved from the leftovers to their faces and then to the house behind him. What he saw in that moment struck something deep inside him, and what he chose to do next would shock everyone. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you believe powerful stories can change hearts, don't forget to subscribe. Her name was Mariam Okoye, and every morning before the sun rose over the city of Lagos, she was already awake. Not because she wanted to be, but because poverty never allowed her to sleep in peace. Mariam stood quietly in the tiny bathroom of the servant quarters, rinsing her face with cold water. The mirror above the cracked sink reflected a woman far older than her years. Her eyes were tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the kind that settles into the bones and never leaves. She tied her faded headscarf carefully, smoothing it down, as if order on the outside could somehow calm the chaos inside her heart. "God, just help me get through today," she whispered. That prayer had become her routine. Mariam worked as a maid in one of the largest private residences in the city, a mansion owned by Mr. Adewale Akinloye, a billionaire whose name appeared often in business headlines but rarely in conversations about kindness. To the world, he was powerful, strategic, untouchable. To Mariam, he was simply the owner of the house. She never spoke to him unless spoken to first, and even then, she kept her eyes lowered. In the kitchen, stainless steel counters gleamed under bright lights. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the air. Cooks moved swiftly, preparing breakfast that would cost more than Mariam earned in a week. Mariam, the head housekeeper, snapped, "Why are you standing there? Clean the dining hall." "Guests are coming this afternoon." "Yes, Ma," Mariam replied quickly, grabbing her cleaning cloth. She did not argue. She never did. As she wiped the long marble table, her mind drifted against her will to the small room she rented across town, to two small mattresses on the floor, to two little boys with the same face and the same hungry eyes. Her sons, twins, Daniel and David. No one in the mansion knew about them. Not the cooks, not the guards, not even the other maids who gossiped endlessly about each other's lives. Mariam had learned early that secrets were sometimes the only protection a poor woman had. She had come to this job 3 years ago, desperate and broken. The twins were barely 4 then. Their father had left before they were born, vanished like smoke the moment responsibility appeared. At first, Mariam thought she could manage. She was wrong. Her salary barely covered rent. School fees were impossible. Food had become a daily battle. Some nights, she cooked only one small pot of rice and told the boys she had already eaten at work. That lie tasted bitter every time. During her short lunch break, Mariam sat alone on a low stool behind the kitchen, eating the small portion she had brought from home. It was mostly gari, mixed with water. No soup, no protein. She ate slowly, stretching every bite. Across the courtyard, she could hear laughter, other staff joking, sharing meat pies someone had brought. She smiled faintly, but did not join them. Her phone buzzed. A message. Mama, we are okay. We ate bread. Her heart tightened. Bread meant leftovers from the neighbor, or charity, or hunger masked with courage. She typed back quickly. Good. Be good, boys. I love you. She stared at the screen longer than necessary before slipping the phone back into her pocket. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the mansion lights came alive, Mariam moved quietly from room to room, dusting shelves, polishing glass, folding expensive clothes she would never wear. In one of the guest rooms, she paused. On the bedside table sat a silver-framed photo of Mr. Akinloye, standing tall in a tailored suit, smiling confidently, surrounded by people who looked just as powerful as he was. Mariam looked at the photo and then away. Men like him lived in a different world, a world where children never had to hide to eat. When her shift finally ended, Mariam signed out and began the long commute home. By the time she reached her street, darkness had swallowed the sky. Her room was quiet when she entered. Too quiet. Mama Daniel's voice called from the corner. Two small bodies rushed toward her, hugging her waist tightly. She dropped her bag and knelt, pulling them close. Did you eat? She asked softly. They hesitated. David nodded too quickly. Yes, Mama. Mariam knew that nod. She said nothing. Instead, she reached into her bag and brought out a small wrapped package, 2 leftover meat buns she had secretly taken from the kitchen that afternoon. Their eyes lit up. For us, Daniel whispered. For you, she said, forcing a smile. They ate eagerly, trying to hide how hungry they were. Mariam turned away, so they wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. Later that night, after the boys fell asleep, she sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the wall. Her mind replayed every insult she had swallowed, every hunger pain she had ignored, every prayer that felt unanswered. She did not know, could not imagine that her sons had already made a decision of their own, a decision driven by love for her, a decision that would soon place them directly in the path of the most powerful man in the city. And when that path crossed, nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel woke up first. He always did. The room was still dark, the kind of dark that made the walls feel closer than they were. For a moment, he lay still, listening. His brother's breathing was soft and uneven beside him. Their mother slept on the thin mattress near the door, one arm stretched out as if even in sleep she was trying to protect them. Daniel's stomach twisted. Hunger had a sound. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, a dull, aching reminder that never truly went away. He sat up slowly and nudged his twin. David, he whispered. David groaned quietly and turned his face toward the wall. Wake up, Daniel said, again softer this time. David opened his eyes. Even in the dim light, Daniel could see the same hollowness he felt inside himself reflected there. Twins didn't need words for many things. Hunger was one of them. They sat up together, knees pulled to their chests. Is Mama awake? David asked. Daniel shook his head. They both looked at her again. Mariam's face even in sleep, was tense. Lines formed between her brows, as if worry had become her permanent expression. "She didn't eat last night," David said quietly. Daniel knew. He had watched her push food toward them, watched her pretend she was full. That memory burned. "I don't like when Mama lies," David added. "She lies because of us," Daniel replied. Silence filled the room. The twins were only 7, but life had forced them to grow older in ways that didn't show on the outside. They had learned to read moods, to calculate portions, to measure how much space their hunger was allowed to take up. Daniel glanced at the small plastic container on the floor. Empty. What if... He began, then stopped. David looked at him. What Daniel hesitated. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the weight of the thought he was about to speak. "What if we help Mama?" David frowned. How Daniel swallowed. He had been thinking about it for days, ever since he had followed Mariam once quietly from a distance and seen where she worked. "The big house," he said. David's eyes widened. "Mama said we shouldn't go there." "I know," Daniel said quickly. "Not inside. Just behind." David stared at him, confused. "When Mama comes home, sometimes she brings food," Daniel continued. "Not much, but it's from there." David understood now. "You mean the trash?" he whispered. Daniel nodded. David's face twisted. "That's dirty." "So is being hungry," Daniel said. The words shocked them both. They sat there, the idea hanging between them, like something dangerous and fragile. "What if someone sees us?" David asked. Daniel thought of Mama crying quietly at night, of her whispering prayers she thought they couldn't hear. "What if nobody helps us?" he replied. That question had no answer. Later that morning, after Mariam left for work, the twins walked to school with empty stomachs and full minds. They paid little attention in class. Numbers blurred. Words lost meaning. At lunchtime, while other children opened lunchboxes, Daniel and David sat quietly pretending to be busy with their notebooks. A boy nearby laughed. "You twins never eat," he said. "Are you fasting?" Daniel forced a smile. "Yes," he lied. "For church." David kept his head down. When school ended, they did not go straight home. Instead, they walked in the opposite direction. The city grew louder as they moved closer to the wealthier part of town. Cars passed with tinted windows. Shops displayed things they could not pronounce, let alone afford. The mansion came into view like something unreal. High walls, tall gates, guards in crisp uniforms. Daniel's heart pounded. "Are you sure?" David asked again. Daniel nodded, even though fear crawled up his spine. They circled around, staying close to walls, mimicking the way they had seen street boys move quick, cautious, and visible. Behind the mansion, the world felt different, quieter, cleaner, smelling of food and chemicals and something rich. There it was, the bins, large, metal, lids half open. Daniel climbed first, holding the edge with shaking hands. David followed. Inside, it was worse than he imagined. Smells collided. Leftovers mixed together without care. David gagged. "I can't." Daniel reached in. His fingers touched something solid. Bread, still wrapped. His breath caught. "David," he whispered urgently, "look." David leaned closer. His eyes filled with something between relief and shame. They worked quickly, silently, taking only what looked untouched, what they hoped would not make them sick. Daniel's hands shook so badly he almost dropped everything. Suddenly a sound. Footsteps. Both boys froze. They crouched, low hearts racing, barely breathing. The steps passed, voices faded. They waited a long time before daring to move again. When they finally climbed down, they ran, not laughing, not celebrating, running because fear was close behind them. Back in their room, they ate slowly, carefully, like children who knew food was not guaranteed. David chewed and looked at Daniel. "Don't tell Mama." Daniel nodded. Never. Days passed, then weeks. The secret became routine. They timed their visits carefully, always after dark, always together, always watching. They never took more than they needed. But hunger is greedy. It asks for more each day. One evening, as they crouched behind the bins again, Daniel noticed something different. The lights at the back of the mansion were on, brighter, and the air felt watched. David sensed it too. "Daniel." "I know," Daniel whispered. They hesitated, then hunger won. Daniel reached into the bin. That was when the shadow fell over them. Still, heavy, unavoidable. They looked up slowly. A man stood there, not a guard, not a worker, someone else. His shoes were polished, his presence heavy with authority. The food slipped from Daniel's hands and fell to the ground. The man said nothing. He simply looked at them. And in that moment, the twins understood something terrifying. They had not just been seen. They had been discovered. For a long moment, no one moved. The night seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's legs trembled so badly, he thought he might collapse. David's fingers dug into his sleeve, clutching him, as if letting go would make everything worse. The food lay scattered on the ground between them. Bread, rice, a piece of chicken, now ruined by dirt. The man did not shout. He did not call for the guards. He simply stood there, looking at them with an expression the boys could not understand. Not anger, not disgust, something heavier. "Stand up," the man said at last. His voice was calm, deep, controlled. Daniel obeyed immediately. David followed, his eyes fixed on the ground. "What are your names?" the man asked. Silence. Daniel swallowed. "Daniel," he said quietly, "this is my brother David." The man nodded once. His gaze moved from one face to the other, lingering, too long, as if he were studying something important. "How old are you?" "7," David whispered. "Why are you here?" the man asked. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He thought of Mama, of her job, of her fear. "We were hungry," he said. The man exhaled slowly, as if the words had landed harder than expected. "Where are your parents?" he asked. Daniel hesitated. David answered first. "We have a mother." The man's eyes sharpened. "Where is she?" "At home," Daniel replied quickly. "She doesn't know we're here." Another pause. The man looked past them toward the glowing windows of the mansion, toward the world of abundance just a few steps away. Then he looked back at the boys. "You should not be here," he said. Daniel's throat tightened. "Please don't call the police." The words burst out of him raw and desperate. "We won't come again," David added, his voice shaking. "We promise." The man stared at them for a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He crouched down. The movement startled the boys. Powerful men did not lower themselves to children like this, especially not poor ones. "What is your mother's name?" he asked gently. Daniel shook his head. "Please. If she loses her job, we'll have nothing." The man closed his eyes briefly. That was the moment he realized something. These boys were not thieves. They were protectors. He stood up slowly. "Go home," he said. Daniel blinked. "Just go." "Yes," the man replied. "Take nothing and go." David hesitated. "We're not in trouble." "No," the man said firmly, "but you must leave now." The boys did not need to be told twice. They ran. Their feet slapped against the pavement as they disappeared into the darkness. Fear and relief tangled together in their chests. The man remained where he was, staring at the empty space they had left behind. Mr. Adewale Akinloye did not believe in coincidences, and what he had just seen disturbed him deeply. He walked back into the mansion, slowly, his mind far from business deals and stock prices. In the kitchen, staff were still cleaning up from dinner. Plates clinked. Laughter echoed. "How much food do we throw away each night?" he asked suddenly. The room fell silent. The head cook cleared his throat. "Sir, how much?" Adewale repeated, his voice sharper. "Now ends up in the trash." The cook hesitated. "Quite a lot, sir. It's standard." Adewale nodded once. "It shouldn't be." He turned and walked out. Upstairs, in his study, Adewale poured himself a glass of water and sat heavily in his chair. The city lights glowed through the tall windows, but for the first time in years, he did not feel comforted by the view. The faces of the two boys replayed in his mind. Identical, thin, hungry. He had grown up poor himself. Not like this, but poor enough to remember the shame of wanting food and pretending you didn't. He had sworn, long ago, that once he escaped poverty, he would never look back. Tonight, poverty had walked right up to him, and it wore the faces of children. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with unusual tension. "Something strange happened last night," the head housekeeper whispered to another maid. What someone was near the bins? Sir Adewale saw them. Mariam froze mid-sweep. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Children. Bins. The room seemed to tilt. She tried to stay calm, but her hands began to shake. "Who?" another maid asked. "Two boys," the housekeeper replied. "Small ones." Mariam's breath caught. No, it couldn't be. She forced herself to keep cleaning, but her mind raced. Daniel, David, their quiet hunger, their bravery, God no. Later that day, she was summoned. Mariam Okoye, the head housekeeper, said stiffly, "Sir wants to see you." Her knees nearly buckled. She followed silently, each step heavier than the last. Inside the study, Adewale sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Mariam," he said. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 3 years, sir." "Do you have children?" The question hit her like a blow. She hesitated. Lying would be easier, but something in his tone made her stop. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "2 boys." Adewale leaned back slowly. "Did you know they were coming here at night?" Tears spilled down her face. "No, sir," she cried. "I swear. I would never. Please don't punish them. Or me." She fell to her knees. Adewale stood abruptly. "Get up," he said, not unkindly. She obeyed, trembling. "Where are they now?" he asked. "At school, sir." Adewale nodded. "Bring them here this evening." Mariam's heart stopped. "Sir." Her mind screamed danger. "Yes, sir," she whispered. She left the room, barely able to breathe. She did not know what awaited her sons, but she knew one thing. The secret she had tried so hard to bury had finally come into the light, and the next chapter of their lives was about to begin. Mariam did not hear the rest of the day. Sounds reached her ears, plates clattering, footsteps echoing down the halls, voices calling her name, but none of them truly registered. Her mind was trapped in one sentence, repeating itself like a drumbeat in her chest. "Bring them here this evening." Her hands shook as she scrubbed the floor. The water sloshed over the bucket, soaking the hem of her dress, but she didn't notice. All she could see were Daniel and David standing in front of that powerful man, their small bodies swallowed by the vastness of his study. What if he changed his mind? What if he called the police? What if he accused them of stealing? Fear wrapped itself around her throat, making it hard to breathe. When her shift finally ended, Mariam did not wait. She rushed out of the mansion, her heart pounding with every step, and boarded the first bus she saw. The ride home felt endless. When she reached their room, the boys were sitting on the floor doing their homework. They looked up, at the same time, their identical faces lighting up when they saw her. Mama, David exclaimed, jumping up. She dropped her bag and pulled them both into her arms, holding them tightly, too tightly. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice cautious. Mariam swallowed hard. "Did you go anywhere after school?" The boys exchanged a look. Daniel looked down. David's shoulders sagged. "Mama," Daniel said slowly, "we didn't want to tell you." Her heart sank. She sat on the mattress, pulling them in front of her. "Tell me." David's eyes filled with tears. "We were hungry." The words cut her open. Daniel continued, his voice shaking. "We went behind the big house, the one where you work." Mariam's breath caught. "We didn't take much," David added quickly. "Only leftovers. We were careful." Mariam covered her mouth as sobs escaped her chest. "Oh, my sons." Daniel panicked. "Mama, please don't cry. We won't do it again. We promise." She pulled them into her chest, rocking slightly. "I should have protected you better," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Then she took a deep breath and told them the truth. "The owner of the house saw you." Both boys froze. Daniel's face went pale. "Is he angry?" "I don't know," Mariam admitted. "But he asked to see you." David grabbed her arm. "Mama, are we going to jail?" "No," she said quickly, even though fear gnawed at her insides. "No one is going to jail." She looked at them, really looked at them. Two small boys who had carried a burden no child should bear. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You will tell the truth. You will be respectful, and you will stay close to me." They nodded. That evening, the mansion felt different. The gates opened slowly as Mariam and her sons entered. Guards watched with curiosity, but said nothing. The boys clutched her hands tightly, their eyes wide. Inside, everything was too big, too clean, too quiet. They were led into the study. Mr. Adewale Akinloye stood by the window, his back to them. "Sir," the housekeeper announced. "They are here." He turned. The boys stiffened. For a moment, Adewale said nothing. He simply looked at them, taking in their faces in the light of the room. "You may go," he told the housekeeper. The door closed softly behind her. Mariam felt her knees weaken. "These are your sons?" Adewale asked. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Daniel and David." The boys bowed their heads. "Look at me," Adewale said gently. They did. He crouched down again, bringing himself to their level. "You ran when I saw you," he said. "Why?" Daniel swallowed. "We were scared." "Of what?" "Of losing Mama." David whispered. The words hung in the air. Adewale stood slowly. "Mariam," he said, "why did you never tell anyone you had children?" She clasped her hands together. "Because when you are poor, sir, people look for reasons to send you away." He studied her face. "Do you steal from this house?" he asked bluntly. "No, sir," she said firmly. "Never." "Do you work honestly?" "Yes, sir." Adewale nodded. Then he did something no one expected. He walked to the door and called out, "Bring food." Moments later, trays were brought in rice stew, breadfruit. The boys stared in disbelief. Adewale gestured to the table. "Sit." They hesitated. "Sit," he repeated. Mariam's eyes filled with tears as she guided her sons forward. "Eat," Adewale said. The boys ate slowly at first, unsure if this was a trick. Then hunger took over. Adewale watched them quietly, not with pity, with something closer to respect. When they finished, he turned to Mariam. "I will not punish your children," he said. Her breath escaped in a sob of relief, but he continued, "This cannot continue." She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I understand. You should not have to choose between dignity and survival," Adewale said. Mariam looked up, startled. "What happens next?" he continued. "Depends on you." Her heart pounded. "I will not give you money tonight," he said, "and I will not send you away." She frowned, confused. "I will offer you something better," he said, "a chance." He turned to the boys. "Would you like to go to school properly?" Their eyes widened. "Yes, sir," they said together. Adewale nodded. "Good." Then he looked at Mariam. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin." Mariam left the study that night, with her sons holding her hands, her heart full of fear, and something she had not felt in years: hope. She did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. The man she had feared most had chosen not to destroy her life. He had chosen to change it. Morning came too quickly. Mariam barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mr. Adewale's study, the polished wood, the heavy silence, the way her sons had eaten, like they were afraid the food might disappear if they blinked. She woke before dawn, her heart already racing. Daniel and David stirred as she moved around the room. Mama Daniel whispered, "Is it today?" "Yes," she said softly. They washed with cold water and dressed in their cleanest clothes, still worn, still patched, but carefully pressed. Mariam tied her scarf with trembling fingers. On the bus ride to the mansion, no one spoke. The city passed by in fragments, market stalls, opening vendors, calling out prices, school children laughing. Life moving forward, unaware that something fragile and uncertain was unfolding inside Mariam's chest. At the gates, the guards let them in without question. That alone made Mariam uneasy. Inside, the housekeeper met them and led them not to the kitchen, not to the servants' quarters, but to a small sitting room near the front of the house. "Wait here," she said curtly. The boys sat close to their mother, their feet barely touching the floor. "Don't be afraid," Mariam whispered, though her voice betrayed her. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. Mr. Adewale entered, dressed simply. No suit, no tie, just a crisp shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like a billionaire this morning and more like a man carrying a decision. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, sir," Mariam replied quickly. Daniel and David echoed her. Adewale nodded and took a seat across from them. "I want to be very clear," he began. "Nothing that happens today is charity." Mariam stiffened. "I do not believe charity changes lives," he continued. "Opportunity does." He leaned forward slightly. "Mariam, tell me about your children." She hesitated, then spoke. "They are good boys," she said. "They try very hard. Daniel likes numbers. David likes to read, even though we don't have many books." Adewale turned to the boys. "Is that true?" Daniel nodded. "I want to be an engineer." David added quickly, "I want to be a teacher." Adewale's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Why a teacher?" David shrugged. "So children won't feel stupid when they don't understand." Something shifted in the room. Adewale leaned back. "You understand?" He said slowly that what you did was dangerous. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. "We won't do it again." "I believe you," Adewale said. "But belief is not enough." He stood. "Come with me." They followed him through hallways Mariam had never been allowed to walk through before. Sunlight poured in through tall windows. The air smelled of polish and fresh flowers. They stopped at a door. Inside was a modest office, not lavish, but orderly. "This," Adewale said, "is where we start." He turned to Mariam. "You will be moved from general cleaning to kitchen assistants. Day shifts only." Mariam blinked. "Sir, you will earn more," he continued. "Enough to pay rent without panic. Enough to buy food without lies." Her knees weakened, but he added, raising a finger, "You will also attend evening classes. Literacy, financial basics." Mariam's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sir, anything." Adewale turned to the boys. "You will attend school," he said, "a proper one." Their mouths fell open, but he continued, "You will work hard. There will be no special treatment because of me." "Yes, sir," they said together. Adewale nodded once. "Good." That afternoon, Mariam was shown her new duties. Some staff whispered, others stared openly. "She's lucky," one maid muttered. "Or she knows something," another replied. The head housekeeper watched from a distance, her lips pressed thin. By evening, Mariam was exhausted. But it was a different kind of exhaustion, one filled with cautious optimism. The boys were taken to a small guest room where they waited wide-eyed, touching nothing. When Adewale returned, he carried something unexpected. 2 school bags, not new, but clean, strong. "For tomorrow," he said, handing them over. Daniel held his bag like it might vanish. "Thank you," David whispered. Adewale nodded. That night, back in their room, the boys could barely sleep. Mama, Daniel said, "Is this real?" Mariam smiled through tears. "Yes, but reality has a way of testing hope." The next day, rumors spread quickly. By lunchtime, the head housekeeper confronted Mariam. "So," she said coldly, "you used your children to get sympathy." Mariam froze. "No, Ma. You embarrassed this house," the woman continued, "begging children, sneaking around like rats." Mariam's chest tightened. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "That is enough." Adewale stood at the doorway. The housekeeper stiffened. "Sir, You were insulting an employee, he said calmly, and questioning my decision. The room fell silent. Anyone who has a problem with Mariam's new position, Adewale continued, has a problem with me. No one spoke. Later that day, Daniel and David returned from school with stories tumbling over each other. New books, teachers who smiled, classmates who shared pencils. Mariam listened, her heart swelling. But that evening, when she returned to the mansion, Adewale called her into his office again. There is something else, he said. Her heart sank. I had you investigated, he continued. Mariam's breath caught. Sir, your past, he said, your work history, your character. She waited, bracing herself. You are exactly who you appeared to be, he said. Honest, quiet, strong. Relief washed over her. But he added, there is someone else watching. Mariam frowned. Who? Sir Adewale's jaw tightened slightly. People do not like changes that expose their indifference, he said. Be careful. That night, as Mariam lay awake, listening to her sons breathe, she understood something clearly. This was not a miracle. It was the beginning of a test. And not everyone wanted them to pass. The warning stayed with Mariam long after Mr. Adewale dismissed her. Be careful. Those words echoed in her mind as she returned home that night, her sons walking beside her with their new school bags swinging proudly on their backs. Daniel talked nonstop about numbers and blackboards. David described a library so quiet it felt like a church made of books. Mariam smiled and nodded, but part of her remained tense, because she had lived long enough to know this truth. When a poor person begins to rise, someone always feels threatened. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed. It was subtle, but Mariam felt it immediately. Whispers followed her down the hallway. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. Eyes lingered too long, measuring her, judging her. In the kitchen, the head cook barely acknowledged her. Your duties have changed, he said flatly. You'll assist with prep only. Do not touch finished meals unless instructed. Yes, sir, Mariam replied calmly. But she noticed how another assistant, a woman named Essie, smirked as she passed. Careful, Essie muttered under her breath. Luck runs out. Mariam kept her head down. She focused on her work, washing vegetables, organizing shelves, following instructions precisely. She refused to give anyone a reason to accuse her of anything. Yet by midday, tension erupted. A tray of expensive cutlery went missing. The kitchen buzzed with panic. Who was here last? The head cook demanded. Several eyes turned toward Mariam. She felt the heat immediately. I was in the pantry, she said quietly. You can ask. Before she could finish, Essie spoke up. I saw her near the dining hall earlier, she said casually. Just saying. Mariam's stomach dropped. That was not true. I wasn't, she began. Enough, the head cook snapped. We'll report it. Mariam's hands began to shake. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. But then unexpectedly, a security guard stepped forward. She wasn't near the dining hall, he said firmly. I was on duty. I saw her in the pantry the whole time. The room went quiet. The head cook frowned. Are you sure? Yes, the guard replied. Very sure. Essie's smirk faded. The cutlery was later found misplaced, not stolen. No apology was offered. But something else happened that afternoon. Mariam was called to the study again. Her heart raced as she approached the door. Inside, Mr. Adewale stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I told you to be careful, he said without turning around. Yes, sir, Mariam replied softly. He faced her. You were tested today. Her eyes widened. Do you know why I did not interfere? Immediately, he asked. She shook her head. Because protection, without proof, creates resentment, he said. And resentment breeds sabotage. Mariam swallowed. You passed, he continued, because you did not panic. You did not fight. And because someone else spoke the truth. She nodded slowly. But understand this, Adewale added. Not everyone will. That evening, when Mariam returned home, she found Daniel unusually quiet. What's wrong? She asked gently. He hesitated. A boy at school said we don't belong there. Her heart tightened. What did you say? I didn't say anything, Daniel replied. But David did. David lifted his chin. I told him we belong wherever we are allowed to learn. Mariam pulled them into her arms. I'm proud of you, she whispered. But the next day, the pressure increased. School fees arrived. Uniform requirements. Books that needed replacing. For the first time, Mariam felt fear again, not of hunger, but of failure. She stood in the kitchen during her break, staring at her pay slip. It was more than before. But was it enough? That night, as she sat on the mattress, counting coins, a knock sounded at the door. She froze. Who is it? She asked. It's me, a familiar voice replied. It was Essie. Mariam opened the door cautiously. Essie stepped inside, her eyes scanning the small room, the boys' books, the thin mattress. You're lucky, Essie said bluntly. Mariam said nothing. You think men like him help for nothing? Essie continued. Be careful, you don't owe more than you can pay. Anger flared in Mariam's chest. My children are not a price, she said quietly. Essie laughed. That's what they all say. She left without another word. Mariam locked the door and leaned against it, trembling not with fear, but with rage. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Adewale arrived at the mansion early, very early. Staff scrambled. He walked straight to the kitchen. Who accused Mariam yesterday? He asked calmly. Silence. I'm asking again, he said, his voice firm. Who? Essie stepped forward pale. Sir, I was only... You were lying, Adewale said, and you know it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Dishonesty, he continued, is more dangerous than hunger. He turned to the head cook. From today, Adewale said all accusations must be verified before action is taken. Yes, sir, the man replied quickly. Then Adewale did something that stunned everyone. He turned to Mariam. Come with me. They walked out together. In front of everyone. In his office, he gestured for her to sit. Mariam, he said, do you know why your sons affected me? She shook her head. Because they reminded me of myself, he said, and of a promise I once broke to never forget where I came from. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside is a long-term plan, he said. Education for your children. Growth for you. Mariam's hands trembled as she opened it. This is too much, she whispered. It is not a gift, Adewale said. It is an investment. She looked up confused. In people? He added. That night, Mariam sat between her sons, reading the folder again and again. For the first time, the future felt tangible. But deep down, she knew something else was happening. This story had traveled too far to remain quiet. And when change challenges, comfort resistance always rises. Change did not announce itself loudly. It crept in. It showed up in small ways. Tight smiles, delayed instructions, doors that once stayed open, now closing a little too quickly. Mariam felt it everywhere. In the kitchen, in the hallways, even in the way some guards avoided her eyes. The mansion still glittered. Meals were still served on time. But beneath the polished surface, something was shifting. People were watching. That morning, as Mariam prepared vegetables in the prep area, the head cook approached her with a clipboard. "Sir Adewale wants a full inventory of the pantry," he said. Mariam nodded. "Yes, sir. You'll do it alone," he added. That was unusual. Still, she said nothing and took the clipboard. Inside, the pantry shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Mariam worked carefully, counting and recording each item. She knew better now than to rush. Mistakes invited suspicion. Halfway through, the door opened. Essie stepped inside. "I thought you might need help," she said, smiling thinly. Mariam kept her eyes on the shelf. "Thank you, but I'm almost done." Essie leaned against the wall. "Funny how life changes," she said. "One day, you're invisible. Next day, you're walking beside the boss." Mariam stayed silent. "You should be careful." Essie continued softly. "People might think you planned all this." Mariam finally turned. "Planned hunger?" she asked calmly. "Planned fear." Essie's smile faltered. "Don't be clever." The door closed behind her. Mariam exhaled slowly and finished the inventory. Later that day, Adewale reviewed the report himself. "Everything accounted for," he said, glancing up. "Good." But his eyes lingered on Mariam's face. "Tell me," he said, "how are your sons adjusting?" "They are trying very hard," Mariam replied. "They study every night." Adewale nodded. "And how are you adjusting?" She hesitated. "I am learning." That answer pleased him. Across town, Daniel and David faced their own tests. At school, the excitement of new uniforms and clean classrooms had faded. Whispers followed them. Questions grew sharper. "Why do you get help?" a boy asked Daniel during break. Daniel shrugged. "Because we need it." Another child scoffed. "My father says rich people don't help for free." David clenched his fists. "Then your father is wrong." A teacher intervened before it could escalate, but the message lingered. That afternoon, the twins were called into the headmaster's office. They sat stiffly on wooden chairs, hands folded. "I have been informed," the headmaster said carefully, "that you receive sponsorship." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. Do you know why Daniel thought of their mother's tired eyes, of the bins, of the shadow? "Because someone saw us," he said simply. The headmaster studied him. "And do you think that makes you better than others?" "No, sir," David answered quickly. "It just means we must work harder." The headmaster leaned back. "Good," he said, "because eyes will be on you." That night, Adewale sat alone in his study long after the house slept. Files lay open on his desk, not business contracts, but reports. Notes, background checks. Mariam's history was clean, too clean, which meant the resistance had to come from somewhere else. He tapped a pen against the desk, thinking. Power had taught him many things. One of them was this kindness disrupted systems built on indifference. And systems did not like disruption. His phone buzzed. A message from his legal advisor. "Be cautious. Some board members are asking questions." Adewale closed his eyes briefly. They always asked questions when money was not involved. The next day, the pressure intensified. An anonymous complaint was submitted. Claim special treatment. misuse of household resources, security risk. Mariam was summoned again. This time the atmosphere was different. Two senior staff members were present. The head housekeeper, a legal assistant. Adewale listened as accusations were read aloud. Mariam stood silently. Her hands clasped her heart steady, despite the pounding in her ears. When it was over, Adewale turned to her. "Do you have anything to say?" "Yes," Mariam replied. Everyone looked surprised. "I have followed every instruction," she said calmly. "I have taken nothing that was not given, and my children have done nothing but study." She met Adewale's eyes. "If that is a crime," she added softly, "then I accept the punishment." The room fell quiet. Adewale stood. "Thank you," he said. He dismissed everyone except Mariam. When they were alone, he sighed. "This was inevitable," he said, "but you handled it well." Mariam hesitated. "Sir, why are you doing this?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke not as a billionaire, but as a man. "When I was 10, he said my mother cleaned offices at night. I waited outside because children weren't allowed inside." Mariam listened unmoving. "One night," he continued, "I was hungry. A man saw me and told me to leave." His jaw tightened. "Another man saw me and brought me bread." He met her gaze. "That bread kept me alive long enough to become someone who could choose differently." Mariam felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I am not saving you," Adewale said. "I am repaying a debt." That evening, Daniel and David returned home excited. Mama Daniel said, "We were chosen to represent our class." For what, she asked. "A math contest," he said proudly. Mariam smiled, but worry flickered behind her eyes. Success drew attention. Attention invited resistance, and resistance was gathering strength. The next morning, Adewale received confirmation of what he had suspected. Someone inside the house was feeding information outward, trying to turn kindness into scandal. He closed the report and stood. It was time to act, not with anger, but with clarity. Because the next move would not only determine Mariam's future, it would reveal who in his world still remembered what it meant to be human. The scandal did not explode. It seeped. It arrived in whispers, in sideways glances, in conversations that stopped the moment Mariam entered a room. It arrived in questions that sounded polite but carried sharp edges. And then one afternoon, it arrived in writing. A sealed envelope was delivered to Mr. Adewale's office. No return address. No signature. Just typed words on plain paper. "The maid is manipulating you. Her children are a liability. This will damage your reputation." Adewale read the letter once, then again. He did not tear it up. Instead, he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Across the house, Mariam felt the shift before she understood it. Her tasks were changed without explanation. She was moved from prep to cleaning, then back again. Instructions contradicted each other. Time frames tightened. Eyes watched. It was a familiar pattern. Pressure. She recognized it from past jobs, the slow squeeze meant to make someone quit without a word being said. That evening, she returned home exhausted, her body aching in ways sleep could not fix. Daniel noticed immediately. "Mama," he said gently, "did someone shout at you today?" She forced a smile. "No." David frowned. "That's not your real smile." She sighed and sat on the mattress, pulling them close. "Listen to me," she said. No matter what happens, you must keep doing your best. At school, everywhere. Daniel nodded. We will. But the next day tested that promise. At school, Daniel's math contest was postponed. No explanation. David's teacher stopped calling on him during reading. At break, a boy pushed Daniel and muttered charity case. Daniel clenched his fists, but remembered his mother's voice. Work harder. Stay calm. That afternoon, a meeting was called at the mansion. Senior staff, legal advisors, even a representative from Adewale's board. Mariam was asked to wait outside. She sat alone in the hallway, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm. Inside the room, voices rose and fell. She's a risk, one man said. Public perception matters, said another. This sets a precedent, a third added. Adewale listened without interruption. When the voices finally faded, he spoke. You are all very concerned about perception, he said quietly. Yes, the board representative replied. Your name carries weight, and hunger does not. Adewale asked. Silence. This woman, he continued, worked for me for 3 years without incident. Her children were invisible to all of us until they were starving. That's unfortunate, the man replied carefully. Adewale leaned forward. No, that is unacceptable. He stood. I will not remove her, he said, and I will not hide her. The room stiffened. Then we advise caution, the representative said. There are donors, partners. Adewale nodded. Then they will learn what I stand for. Outside, Mariam waited. When the door opened, she stood immediately. Adewale looked at her. Mariam, he said, go home early today. Her stomach dropped. Sir. Take your children, he added. Be with them. She nodded, unsure. As she walked away, she felt eyes on her back, some curious, some angry. At home, the boys sensed something was wrong. Mama David asked, Are we leaving the school? She knelt in front of them. No, not yet. Daniel searched her face. Did we do something bad? No, she said firmly. Never think that. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain battered the tin roof as Mariam lay awake, listening to her sons breathe. Each clap of thunder echoed the pounding in her chest. She thought of the letter she had never seen, of meetings she was never allowed into, of decisions made by people who had never known hunger. And for the first time since this journey began, fear returned, not of poverty, but of hope being taken away. The next morning, it happened. 2 men in suits arrived at the mansion early. An audit. They asked questions, checked logs, reviewed schedules. When they reached the kitchen, one of them turned to Mariam. Do you receive benefits beyond your salary? He asked. No, she replied. Do your children live on the premises? No. Do you take food home without authorization? Mariam hesitated for half a second. I take what is given, she said carefully. The man scribbled something. Essie watched from across the room, her eyes gleaming. That afternoon, Mariam was called into the study again. This time, Adewale looked tired. There is pressure, he said honestly. More than I expected. Mariam swallowed. Sir, if I am the problem. You are not, he interrupted. But he continued, this is bigger than you now. She nodded slowly. What do you want to do? He asked. The question surprised her. I want my children safe, she said simply. And educated, even if it is not here. Adewale studied her face. You are stronger than you know, he said. He reached into his drawer and took out the letter. This was sent to me, he said, handing it to her. She read it. Her hands trembled, but she did not cry. I'm sorry, she whispered, for what he asked, for bringing trouble into your house. Adewale shook his head. Trouble was already here. You just exposed it. That evening, as Mariam prepared a small meal, a knock came at the door. Daniel opened it. A uniformed officer stood outside. Mariam Okoye, he asked. Her heart stopped. Yes, she replied, stepping forward. You are requested for questioning, he said. David clung to her arm. Mama? She knelt quickly. Listen to me, she said, holding their faces. Stay together. I will come back. She stood and followed the officer into the night. As the door closed behind her, the boys stood frozen fear gripping their chests. Across the city, Adewale received a call. They took her, his assistant said. Adewale's jaw tightened. This was no longer about rumors. This was about power pushing back. And Adewale Akinloye did not lose battles quietly. The room they took Mariam into was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. She sat on a hard chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her back straight despite the tremor running through her body. Across from her, a desk. Behind it, two officers, one older, one younger, both wearing expressions carefully trained to reveal nothing. Mariam Okoye. The older officer began flipping open a thin file. You work at the Akinloye residence. Yes, sir, she replied calmly. You are aware of the allegations made against you. Her chest tightened. No, sir. The younger officer leaned forward. You have been accused of theft, misuse of resources, and exploiting access to a high-profile individual. Mariam closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. I have taken nothing that was not given, she said, and I have exploited no one. The older officer studied her face. Your children were found trespassing on private property. Yes, Mariam said softly, because they were hungry. The younger officer scoffed. That doesn't excuse. Enough, the older officer said, quietly raising a hand. He looked back at Mariam. Did Mr. Adewale Akinloye instruct you to take food from the residence? No, sir. Did he offer you special privileges? No, sir. Silence followed. Mariam's mind raced not with fear for herself, but with terror for her sons. Were they alone? Were they safe? May I ask something? She said suddenly. The older officer hesitated, then nodded. My children, Mariam said, her voice steady, despite the ache in her chest. Are they safe? The officer exchanged a glance with his colleague. They are not under investigation, he said, for now. That answer did not comfort her. Across town, Daniel and David sat on the floor of their room, backs against the wall, knees pulled to their chests. The rain had stopped, but the silence felt heavier than the storm. She said she would come back, David whispered. Daniel nodded, though the doubt crept into his eyes. At the mansion, Adewale stood in his study phone, pressed tightly to his ear. This is harassment, he said sharply. You have no grounds. On the other end, a calm voice replied, Sir, with respect, once accusations are filed, then file the truth. Adewale cut in, or step aside. He ended the call and turned to his assistant. Bring me everything he said. Security footage, logs, statements. Yes, sir. Minutes later, screens flickered to life. Adewale watched as footage played night after night, the back of the mansion, the bins, the boys moving cautiously. No damage, no forced entry, no theft beyond discarded food. He fast-forwarded, then stopped. There, he said. The assistant leaned closer. That's Isi. Indeed. On screen, Isi could be seen removing a tray of cutlery from the dining area and placing it in an unauthorized cabinet. Later footage showed her discovering it missing. Adewale's jaw clenched. Send this to legal, he said, and to the board. Yes, sir. Then he picked up his phone again. Get me the commissioner, he said. Back in the interrogation room, Mariam answered question after question with the same quiet honesty. Her voice never rose. Her posture never wavered. Finally, the door opened. A uniformed officer stepped inside and whispered something to the older man. The officer's expression changed. Miss Okoye, he said, standing, you are free to go. Her heart skipped. Free? Yes, he said. There is no evidence to support the allegations. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. However, he continued, you should be aware that this matter has drawn attention. Be cautious. Mariam nodded and stood, her legs weak beneath her. Outside, a familiar car waited. The door opened. Mariam, Adewale said, stepping out. For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then her composure broke. Tears spilled down her face as she bowed her head. I'm so sorry, sir. He shook his head firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. He gestured toward the car. Get in. Your sons are waiting. Her breath caught. Inside the car, Daniel and David sat side by side, eyes wide. The moment they saw her, they lunged forward. Mama. She pulled them into her arms, sobbing openly, now holding them as if the world might take them again. Adewale watched quietly. When they reached the mansion, staff stood frozen as Adewale walked in, not alone but with Mariam and her children at his side. Everyone, he said calmly, his voice carrying through the hall. I have an announcement. People gathered. Whispers died. An accusation was made against Mariam Okoye. Adewale continued. It was false. Murmurs rippled. Evidence has confirmed that the theft reported was staged, he said, by someone within this house. Eyes darted. Effective immediately, he added, Essie is dismissed and will face further investigation. Essie's face drained of color. But, sir, she stammered. Security. Adewale said simply. She was escorted out, her protests echoing down the hall. Adewale turned back to the staff. Let me be clear, he said. Compassion is not weakness, and anyone who believes dignity is a privilege for the wealthy has no place here. Silence followed. Then Adewale did something no one expected. He turned to Mariam. From today, he said, you will no longer work as household staff. Gasps filled the room. Mariam's heart pounded. Sir, you will be transferred, he continued, to the foundation. The words landed slowly. My foundation, he clarified. Working with outreach programs, education, food security. He looked at her sons. And your children, he added, will be beneficiaries, not symbols. Mariam could barely breathe. I don't understand, she whispered. You will. Adewale replied gently. In time. That night, as Mariam lay between her sons in a guest room, temporary but safe, she stared at the ceiling overwhelmed. Everything had changed. Not because of pity, but because truth had been brought into the light. Outside, the city hummed as it always had. But for one small family, the future had cracked open wide and uncertain, yet filled with something stronger than fear. Justice. The guest room felt unreal. Mariam lay awake long after the lights were turned off, listening to the soft, even breathing of Daniel and David beside her. The bed was too large, the sheets too clean, the quiet too deep. She had spent most of her life falling asleep to hunger and worry. This kind of silence made her uneasy. Mama Daniel whispered into the darkness, "Yes, my love. Are we still poor?" The question landed softly, but carried weight. Mariam turned onto her side so she could see his face. "We are still us," she said carefully, "and we are still learning." David rolled closer. "Does that mean we're staying?" Mariam hesitated. "It means we don't know yet." That was the truth. Everything else felt too fragile to name. The next morning began with unfamiliar routines. A staff member brought breakfast to the room, simple food, not extravagant, but more than Mariam was used to seeing on a single plate. She thanked the woman politely, then waited until the door closed before turning to her sons. "Eat slowly," she said, "and say thank you." They nodded wide-eyed and obeyed. At 9 o'clock sharp, a knock sounded. A man in a neatly pressed shirt introduced himself as Mr. Kola, the coordinator of the Akinloye Foundation. His smile was warm but professional. "Sir Adewale would like to see you," he said. "All of you." They were led to a different wing of the estate, one Mariam had never entered. The walls displayed photographs, children in classrooms, women learning trades, communities receiving clean water. Not decoration, documentation. Adewale waited inside a modest conference room. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, sir," Mariam replied, her voice steady. He gestured for them to sit. "I want to explain what happens next," Adewale began, "because clarity matters." Mariam nodded, her hands folded tightly. "You will work with the foundation," he said, "not as a story, not as an example, as staff." Her heart fluttered. "You will start with community outreach," he continued, "listening, organizing, supporting those who often go unseen." Mariam swallowed. "I have no training, sir." "You have experience," Adewale replied, "and integrity. Training can be taught." He turned to the boys. "You will continue school," he said, "but there will be rules." Daniel sat up straighter. "Yes, sir. No skipping," Adewale said. "No entitlement." "Yes, sir, and no hiding," he added gently. David nodded. "We won't hide again." Adewale's expression softened. "Good." As they stood to leave, Mariam hesitated. "Sir?" "Why me?" He met her gaze. "Because you did not ask for more than dignity." That afternoon, Mariam began orientation at the Foundation's offices downtown. The building was modest compared to the mansion, but alive with purpose. Phones rang. People moved with intention. Conversations were focused, urgent, human. She was assigned a mentor, Mrs. Nena, a woman with kind eyes and a firm voice. "We work hard here," Mrs. Nana said. "We don't rescue, we empower." "Yes, Ma," Mariam replied. Her first task was simple: accompany a team delivering school supplies to a low-income neighborhood. As the van rolled through streets that looked painfully familiar, Mariam's chest tightened. She recognized the cracked sidewalks, the vendors with tired smiles, the children watching from doorways. When they arrived, a small crowd gathered: mothers, grandparents, children barefoot on warm concrete. Mariam helped distribute notebooks and pencils. She knelt to speak to a woman holding a baby. "What do you need most?" Mariam asked. The woman laughed bitterly. "Work." Mariam nodded. She understood. Later, as she helped a child tie his shoes, something shifted inside her. Not pride, not relief, but responsibility. This wasn't luck. It was a calling. Across town, Daniel and David faced their own challenges. Their classmates had heard whispers. Some looked at them with curiosity, others with suspicion. At lunch, a boy asked, "Is it true your mother works for a rich man now?" Daniel paused. "She works," he said simply. "Are you rich too?" another asked. David shook his head. "We're students." The questions didn't stop, but neither did the boys. They studied, they listened, they helped classmates when they could. One afternoon, Daniel stayed after school to help a girl struggling with multiplication. David volunteered to read aloud during library time. They were learning a new language, belonging without boasting. That evening, Mariam returned to the guest room, exhausted, her feet aching, her mind buzzing. "How was it?" Daniel asked. She smiled, hard. David grinned. "That means good." She laughed softly. "Yes, that means good." Days turned into a week, then two. Mariam moved into a small apartment, arranged by the foundation. Nothing fancy, but safe and close to schools and work. She insisted on paying rent from her salary. Adewale did not argue. One evening, as Mariam reviewed her notes, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Ms. Okoye," a woman's voice said, "I'm calling from a community group. We heard you might help us organize a food program." Mariam's heart raced. "Yes," she replied, "I can come." She hung up and stared at the phone, overwhelmed. The boys watched her quietly. Mama Daniel said, "Are you scared?" She nodded. "A little." David took her hand. "We are too." She squeezed back. "Then we'll be brave together." At the mansion, Adewale reviewed reports late into the night. Progress metrics, attendance numbers, notes from field teams. Mariam's name appeared often, not as a headline, but as a constant. He leaned back, thoughtful. Change was happening, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, and that he knew was the kind that lasted. The first real test came without warning. Mariam was halfway through a planning meeting at the foundation when Mrs. Nenena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. "There's a problem," she said, standing. "Come with me." They drove across the city in silence, the afternoon sun glaring through the windshield. As they turned into a narrow street lined with old concrete houses, Mariam felt a familiar heaviness settle in her chest. This was the kind of place she knew too well. A small crowd had gathered outside a community hall. Voices overlapped, angry, desperate, confused. "What's going on?" Mariam asked as they stepped out. A young man pointed toward the building. "They said food was coming. We waited all morning. Nothing came." Mrs. Nenna frowned. "The supplies were dispatched." "Then where are they?" a woman demanded, holding a thin child on her hip. Mariam scanned the faces around her. Hunger looked the same everywhere. It didn't shout. It stared. She stepped forward. "Please," she said, raising her voice just enough to be heard. "Let us find out what happened." A man scoffed. "We've heard that before." Mariam swallowed and nodded. "I know." She pulled out her phone and made a call, then another. Her hands were steady, but her heart pounded. If this failed, it wouldn't just be a logistical error. It would be a broken promise. After 10 tense minutes, a truck finally appeared at the end of the street, crawling forward through the crowd. Murmurs rippled. When it stopped, the driver jumped down, sweating and flustered. The route was blocked, he explained quickly. There was confusion. "Next time," Mariam said calmly, meeting his eyes, "call ahead. People wait when they trust you. Don't make them wait without answers." The distribution began. As food parcels were handed out, the tension eased. Mothers sighed with relief. Children clutched bags as if they might vanish. A woman approached Mariam quietly. "You stayed," she said. "Others come talk, then leave." Mariam nodded. Staying matters. That evening, she returned home late, drained, but fulfilled. Daniel and David were waiting, homework spread across the table. "You're late," Daniel said, not accusing, just observing. "Yes," Mariam replied, sitting. There was a delay. David studied her face. "Did it work?" She smiled. "It did." He grinned. Then it was worth it. At school, the twins faced another challenge. A teacher called Daniel aside after class. "You're very good at math," she said. "Have you considered the regional competition?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know if you should," she insisted, "but it will mean extra classes, more attention." That word again. Attention. At home. Daniel shared the news. Mariam listened carefully. "Do you want to do it?" He nodded slowly. "I think so, but I don't want to make things harder for you." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't make my life harder by growing," she said. "You make it meaningful." David piped up. "Can I help?" Daniel laughed. "You already do." The weeks that followed were demanding. Mariam balanced training sessions, fieldwork, and meetings. Some days, she felt stretched thin. She learned to read budgets, organize volunteers, and speak in front of groups without shrinking. Not everyone welcomed her. At one meeting, a local leader leaned back in his chair and said, "Experience matters. Good intentions aren't enough." Mariam nodded. "That's why I listen." He raised an eyebrow. "And what do you hear?" "That people don't want saving," she replied. "They want tools." The room went quiet. Later, Mrs. Nenna smiled. "You're learning quickly." Across town, Daniel's competition preparations intensified. He stayed after school solving problems until numbers blurred. David sat nearby, reading aloud softly to keep him company. One afternoon, a boy sneered, "Think you're special now." Daniel paused, then shook his head. "No, I'm just trying." The boy scoffed, "Trying to be rich." Daniel met his gaze, trying to be useful. The insult had nowhere to land. The day of the competition arrived. Mariam took time off work, her heart in her throat, as she watched Daniel enter the hall. Rows of students, serious faces, teachers pacing. She squeezed David's hand. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we're proud." Hours later, the results were announced. Daniel placed second, not first, second. His shoulders slumped for a moment. Then he looked at his mother. She was smiling. You did well, she said. I wanted to win, he admitted. You will, she replied. Today, you learned. That night, as they celebrated with a simple meal, Mariam received a call from Adewale. I heard about the distribution issue, he said. You handled it. She hesitated. It was a team effort. He chuckled softly. That answer tells me everything. He paused. There's something else. The board wants to meet you. Her heart skipped. Why? Because impact invites scrutiny, he said, and because you're no longer invisible. After the call, Mariam sat quietly. David noticed. Is it bad? She shook her head. It's important. The meeting was formal. Questions were direct. Why, you one board member asked. Mariam took a breath. Because I know what happens when systems fail quietly. Another leaned forward. And if resources run out? Then we adjust, she replied. But we don't disappear. When it ended, Adewale walked her out. You didn't impress them with words, he said. You unsettled them with truth. She exhaled. Is that good? It is necessary, he replied. That night, Mariam sat by the window of their apartment, city lights flickering. The boys slept soundly behind her. She thought of the bins, the shadow, the fear, and then, of today, plans, voices, purpose. This was no longer about survival. It was about direction. And for the first time, she knew exactly where she was going. Success did not arrive with applause. It arrived with resistance. The morning after the board meeting, Mariam walked into the foundation office to find tension thick in the air. Conversations hushed as she passed. Emails sat unanswered longer than usual. A meeting on the calendar had been quietly removed. Mrs. Nena noticed immediately. Don't rush, she murmured as they walked together. When systems feel threatened, they slow things down. Mariam nodded. She had felt that slowdown before, when landlords delayed repairs, when supervisors postponed payments, when promises lingered just long enough to make hope ache. By midday, the slowdown turned into something sharper. A report circulated unsigned, unofficial questioning the Foundation's recent focus. It praised sustainable outcomes while criticizing emotion-driven decisions. Everyone knew what that meant. Mariam closed the document and breathed deeply. That afternoon, she visited a secondary school on the edge of the city to assess a pilot program. The principal met her with folded arms and a measured smile. Your intentions are good, he said, but our students need consistency. So do their stomachs, Mariam replied gently. He blinked, then sighed. We've seen programs come and go. I'm not here to come and go, she said. I'm here to build something that stays after I leave the room. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Let's begin with attendance. Back home, Daniel was struggling. He sat at the small desk, erasing the same line over and over. Numbers tangled. His shoulders sagged. David hovered nearby. You're tired. Daniel rubbed his eyes. Everyone expects more now. David frowned. More than what? More than me, Daniel said quietly. That evening, Mariam noticed the tension the moment she stepped inside. Talk to me, she said, setting her bag down. Daniel hesitated, then spoke. If I don't do well, people will think we didn't deserve help. Mariam crossed the room and knelt beside him. Listen, she said softly. You do not owe perfection to anyone. You owe effort to yourself. He swallowed. But what if they stop believing? She took his hands. Then they were never believing in the right thing. The next week brought another test, a donor visit, clean shoes, prepared slides, carefully chosen stories. Mariam stood at the back of the room while presentations unfolded. When questions came, they were sharp. How do you measure impact? What safeguards exist? Who ensures accountability? A man in a gray suit glanced at Mariam. And you, what qualifies you to lead these initiatives? The room stilled. Mariam stepped forward. I am qualified by experience, she said. By listening when others talk. By staying when others leave. And by knowing that dignity is not a metric, but its absence is measurable. Silence followed. Then a woman at the table nodded slowly. Proceed. That night, Mariam returned home exhausted. Daniel had left a note on the table, studying with David. Back soon. She smiled faintly. The boys returned an hour later breathless. Daniel helped 3 people today, David announced. Daniel shrugged. We studied together. Mariam hugged them both. That's leadership, she said, but leadership often comes with cost. The following day, a message arrived from a partner organization withdrawing support. No explanation, no discussion. Mrs. Nanena read the email and sighed. This will sting. Mariam nodded. We'll adjust. They did. They reduced expenses, reorganized schedules, asked volunteers to cover gaps. Mariam took on extra field visits, waking before dawn and returning after dark. One evening, while distributing supplies in a riverside community, a woman grabbed Mariam's arm. Don't stop, she said urgently. They stop when cameras leave. Mariam held her gaze. We're not leaving. At school, Daniel faced another challenge. A regional coordinator visited the class and asked him to demonstrate a problem on the board. His mind went blank. Chalk trembled in his hand. Snickers rose. David watched from the doorway, heart pounding. Daniel closed his eyes, took a breath, and began again slowly. Step by step. He finished. Not perfectly, but correctly. Applause followed, small, hesitant, then real. After class, the coordinator pulled him aside. You don't rush, she observed. I think carefully, Daniel replied. She smiled. That will take you far. That weekend, Adewale invited Mariam to his office. Sit, he said. She did. Some partners are uncomfortable, he continued. They prefer distance. Mariam nodded. Distance feels safer. Yes, he agreed. But safety rarely changes anything. He slid a document across the desk. I'm increasing local oversight, transparent reporting. Community voices. She scanned the page. This will upset people. Adewale smiled faintly. Good. Outside the office, Mariam paused. Sir, she said, if this becomes too costly, it already is, he interrupted gently, but the cost of doing nothing is higher. That night, the boys celebrated David's reading award with laughter and warm tea. We didn't win. First, David said proudly. Mariam laughed. You won growth. As the months passed, progress became visible. Attendance rose. A small library opened. A pilot meal program stabilized. And then, unexpectedly, a newspaper ran a story. Not sensational, not flattering, honest. It spoke of quiet change, of systems bending, of a former maid now coordinating outreach with uncommon resolve. The phones rang. Some calls offered support, others warned. Mariam read the article once, then folded it neatly. "Does this mean more trouble?" Daniel asked. She smiled. "It means more responsibility." The next morning, she stood before a room of new volunteers. "Welcome," she began. "We're here to work, not to be seen." They listened. Across the city, Adewale watched the Foundation's metrics update slow, steady improvement. He leaned back, thoughtful. Resistance had not broken them, it had clarified them. And Mariam, once invisible, now stood at the center of a movement that refused to disappear quietly. The story had begun with hunger. It was becoming something else entirely. The invitation arrived without ceremony. A plain envelope, no logo, no press. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Community Review Forum attendance required. Mariam read it twice. Forums were never simple. They were where progress was questioned, where decisions were challenged, where voices long ignored finally found a microphone. They were also where backlash gathered strength. Still, she marked the date. On the morning of the forum, Mariam stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing expensive, nothing apologetic. She tied her scarf carefully, then paused, resting her hands on the sink. "Whatever happens," she whispered to herself, "tell the truth." Daniel and David watched from the doorway. "Are we coming?" David asked. "No," Mariam replied gently. "Today, I go alone." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because leadership sometimes means standing where others don't have to," she said. They hugged her tightly before she left. The hall was already crowded when Mariam arrived. Rows of plastic chairs filled quickly. Community leaders, teachers, volunteers, parents. At the front sat a long table with name cards and microphones. Adewale arrived quietly and took a seat at the far end observing. When Mariam's name was called, she stepped forward. The moderator began politely. "We're here to assess outcomes, concerns, and direction." Hands shot up immediately. A man stood. "These programs are uneven. Some areas benefit more than others." A woman followed. "We were promised consistency. Deliveries were late." Another voice rose. "Why her?" Who appointed her? Mariam listened without interruption. When the moderator finally nodded to her, the room fell still. "I hear your concerns," Mariam said, "and some of them are true." Murmurs rippled. "We've had delays," she continued. "We've had gaps, not because we don't care, but because systems are learning new habits." A man scoffed. "That sounds like an excuse." Mariam met his eyes. "It sounds like reality." She took a breath. "I was hired, not because I have all the answers," she said, "but because I know what happens when questions go unanswered." She gestured to the room. "Many of you have lived it." Silence. A teacher stood. "I've seen attendance improve," she said, "but I worry it won't last." Mariam nodded. "So do I. That's why we're training local coordinators, so the work stays when we step back." A woman near the back raised her hand. "And when funding ends," Mariam answered honestly, "then we will have built tools, skills networks, accountability that don't disappear with money." The moderator leaned forward. "Some believe your personal story influences decisions." Mariam paused. "My story informs my work," she said. "It does not replace standards." She glanced briefly toward Adewale, then back to the room. No one here is a symbol, she continued. Not me, not the children we serve. We are people. The forum lasted hours. By the end, voices were quieter, not convinced, but heard. Outside, the sun dipped low as people dispersed. Adewale approached Mariam. You didn't defend yourself, he observed. I defended the work, she replied. He smiled. That's why this matters. That evening, Mariam returned home drained. Daniel noticed immediately. Did they shout? She laughed softly. Some did. David tilted his head. Did you shout back? No, she said. I listened. They ate dinner together in comfortable silence. Later that night, Mariam sat alone on the balcony, city lights blinking like distant stars. She thought of the bins behind the mansion, of the shadow that had changed everything. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Ninena. You held your ground today. Proud of you. Mariam closed her eyes, letting the words settle. The next weeks brought decisions. A smaller budget, but longer commitments. Fewer headlines, but deeper partnerships. Programs adjusted, refined, strengthened. One afternoon, Adewale called her into his office. I'm stepping back from daily oversight, he said. Mariam's heart skipped. Sir, the foundation needs autonomy, he continued, and you've earned trust. She hesitated. What if I fail? Adewale smiled. Then we learn. Failure is not neglect. He handed her a folder. This outlines expanded authority within clear limits. She opened it slowly. This is responsibility. Yes, he said. Not power. At home, Daniel faced his own decision. A letter arrived inviting him to a specialized math program across town, long hours, higher expectations. I don't want to leave David behind, he said quietly. David scoffed. I'm not furniture. Daniel laughed, then grew serious. It will be hard. Mariam knelt between them. Hard doesn't mean wrong, she said. But it must be your choice. Daniel nodded. I want to try. David grinned. I'll help you study. The first day of the program, Daniel returned exhausted but glowing. They don't rush, he said. They think. Mariam smiled. So do you. David earned his own moment soon after a reading competition where he didn't win, but spoke with confidence that turned heads. At the foundation, Mariam faced a final test. A proposal arrived from a major partner, significant funding, broad reach, but strict conditions that limited community input. The room was divided. This could change everything, someone argued. It could also compromise us, another replied. Mariam listened. Then she spoke. We accept support, she said, not silence. The proposal was revised, funding reduced, values intact. When the decision was announced, some applauded, others resigned. Mariam felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders and stay. That night, she walked home alone, the city humming around her. She passed a small shop where children pressed their faces to the glass, watching bread being arranged. She stopped, bought a loaf, handed it to a woman nearby without a word. The woman looked up, startled. Thank you. Mariam nodded and walked on. At home, Daniel and David waited with news. Tomorrow, David said, our class is visiting the foundation. Mariam laughed. Be kind. Daniel grinned. We will. As she tucked them in, Mariam felt something solid beneath the uncertainty. Not comfort, not certainty, purpose. The road ahead was not smooth. It never would be. But it was clear, and she was no longer walking it alone. The morning the buses arrived, Mariam stood at the entrance of the foundation building and watched children step down one by one. They came in uniforms that didn't quite fit yet, shoes scuffed at the toes, backpacks hanging too low on thin shoulders. Their eyes moved everywhere at once, curious, cautious, hopeful. Daniel and David stood beside her, wearing their school badges proudly. "Remember?" Mariam whispered. "We host, we don't show off." "Yes, Mama," they replied together. Inside the building, volunteers guided the students through classrooms, the small library, the meal hall. The noise rose, laughter, questions, footsteps, echoing against walls that had once felt intimidating even to Mariam herself. Now they felt alive. A teacher approached Mariam quietly. "I didn't believe this would last," she admitted. "I was wrong." Mariam smiled gently. "So was I, many times." The tour ended in the main hall, where Mariam stood before the children. "Welcome," she said simply. "This place exists because people believed small things matter." A hand shot up. "Yes," Mariam said. A little girl stood. "Are you rich?" The room went quiet. Mariam knelt so she was at eye level with the girl. "No," she said honestly, "but I am not poor in the ways that matter." The girl nodded, satisfied. At the back of the room, Adewale watched. He had not planned to speak. He rarely did anymore. But something about the moment, the children, the calm confidence in Mariam's voice pulled him forward. "May I add something?" he asked. Mariam stepped aside. Adewale faced the room. "This foundation was not built to make anyone a hero," he said. "It was built because hunger should never be invisible." He paused. "And because the people closest to the problem often hold the clearest solutions." His eyes met Mariam's briefly. The applause that followed was not thunderous. It was steady. That afternoon, as the buses departed, Mariam felt a familiar ache in her chest. Not fear, not exhaustion. Gratitude. Later that day, Daniel returned from his advanced program, unusually quiet. "Mama," he said, as they walked home. One boy said, "I only got there because of you." Mariam stopped. "What did you say?" Daniel shrugged. "I said I stayed because of me." She smiled, pride warming her chest. David chimed in. "And because you study like an old man." Daniel groaned. "I do not." That evening, as they ate dinner together, Mariam looked at her sons and felt the weight of time. They were growing not just taller, but steadier, more certain of who they were. After dinner, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Nanena stood outside smiling. "They approved the expansion," she said. "3 more communities." Mariam closed her eyes briefly. "Then we begin again." "Yes," Mrs. Nanena replied. "Together." When the door closed, Mariam sat quietly for a long time. She thought of the night Daniel and David had crouched behind the bins, their hands shaking as they reached for leftovers. She thought of the shadow that had fallen across them, and how that shadow had not crushed them. It had revealed them. Weeks later, the foundation held a small, informal gathering. No cameras, no donors, just staff, volunteers, families. A woman approached Mariam with a young boy. "He used to hide food under his bed," the woman said softly. "He doesn't anymore." Mariam knelt in front of the boy. "You don't have to hide here," she said. He nodded solemnly. Across the room, Adewale spoke quietly with a former partner who had once opposed him. "You were stubborn," the man admitted. Adewale smiled faintly. "I still am." "Why didn't you walk away when it got complicated?" the man asked. Adewale glanced toward Mariam, who was laughing with a group of children. Because walking away is easy when the problem doesn't have a face, he said. That night, after everyone had left, Mariam locked up the building and stepped outside. The city air was warm, familiar. She walked home slowly. When she reached her apartment, Daniel was reading at the table. David was drawing. "What are you drawing?" she asked. David held it up. It was a simple picture, 3 figures holding hands, a big house in the distance, a small building with open doors. "What is it?" Mariam asked. "Our story," David said. She sat down and pulled them both close. "No," she said gently. "It's the beginning of many stories." Months passed. The foundation grew not fast, not flashy, but rooted. Mariam made mistakes, learned, corrected them. Daniel struggled sometimes. So did David. But they never hid. One evening, Mariam received a message from a woman in another city. "We heard what you're doing. Can you teach us how to start?" Mariam stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back, "Yes. We can learn together." That night, as she lay in bed, Mariam felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was being hidden anymore. Hunger had been seen, dignity had been restored, and kindness, quiet, stubborn human kindness, had proven stronger than fear. She turned toward her sleeping sons and whispered a prayer of thanks for the pain that did not destroy them, for the man who chose compassion over comfort, and for the truth she had learned the hard way, that the smallest acts of humanity, when seen and honored, can change the direction of an entire life. In life, it's easy to look away from hunger. We don't feel pain, we don't carry, and people we don't see. But this story reminds us that destiny often changes not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments of compassion. A child asking for leftovers, a mother refusing to lose her dignity, a powerful man choosing humanity over reputation. Kindness does not always arrive with comfort, but it always leaves impact. What we choose to do when no one is watching can echo for generations. And sometimes the greatest wealth we will ever possess is the courage to see others as human. So, here's a question for you. If you were standing in the dark and you saw someone hungry, what would you choose to do? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories of hope, karma, and human value matter to you, don't forget to subscribe and walk this journey with us.